In this video, we're going to be taking a look at the assembly of my universal spool stand. There's a constantly growing list of supported applications, including the Ender 3 series as well as the K1 and K1 Max, and we'll be covering some of those in this video. It features a tool holder in the base that can handle all of the tools that you'll find in the generic Ender 3 accessory kits, and your side cutters can be conveniently stored on the bracket above that, very close to the spool, so they're never out of reach when you're about to change filament. I've yet to find a spool that does not fit the spool holder at the top of the mount, and the friction on the spool holder can actually be adjusted. I designed the spool stand to solve a number of problems. The first of which is the undesirable forces imparted onto your printer frame when you're hanging a 1 kilogram spool at the top of the printer. If you look closely, the frame can be moving around quite a bit during a high-speed print, and this could lead to unwanted print artifacts. I also wasn't happy with the inconvenient and inadequate spool mounting location on printers like the K1 and K1 Max. So no longer do you have to reach behind your machine to change your filament on one of these inferior spool pegs. The spool stand kit is available on my website embracemaking.com, and I'll put a link to that in the video description down below, as well as a link to the application page. This is where you'll find printable accessories for specific applications, and we'll get into that in this video. We'll begin with the assembly of the spool stand itself, and the kit comes with all of the core components that you'll need for the universal spool stand. This includes all of the brackets and hardware required for the spool stand, and there will be an additional hardware bag that includes all of the necessary hardware for many of the most popular applications, some of which I'll show you in this video. I'll start with the components that make up the base of the spool stand. There are 4 of these non-slip foot clips, and there are 4 non-slip pads. The pads have an adhesive backing, and we can stick them to the bottom of the clip, and we'll do this 4 times. For now, we'll put these 4 clips aside, and we'll focus on the main body base. At the bottom of the base, you'll notice 4 holes, and those 4 holes will be for our M4 thread forming screws. They're about 20 millimeters long. You'll also find M4 washers in the hardware kit, and we'll be using these screws and washers to attach our slotted support feet. Pay close attention to which side of the base the support feet will stick out from. On this side here, we'll leave 1 slot open, and you'll see the short side is facing this direction. These screws cut their own threads into the plastic, so you can actually start the process by hand, and you can give them a half turn with your fingers before moving on to the screwdriver, driving those screws the rest of the way into the plastic. And you'll probably hear me say this a few times during this video, but just remember that you're tightening screws into plastic parts, so you do not need to over tighten them. Over tightening screws can lead to stripped holes or even collapsed plastic parts. Once you have 2 screws in place, you can use these slots in the feet to make some minor adjustments. I personally like pushing the feet over to one end where the screws and washers have a little more engagement on those metal feet. After that, we can simply repeat the process for the second slotted foot. When you're finished, it should look something like this, and another friendly reminder that the longer side of the slotted feet should be facing this direction on the base. Now we can grab our non-slip foot clips, and you can see the little hooks on these clips. There's one side that is slightly longer than the other side. In this case, it's the right-hand side. And we're gonna hook that onto our slotted feet first. And then we can line up the raised slotted boss in the clip and push it the rest of the way onto the slotted foot. And it should clip into place. Now we have a very nice non-slip foot for our spool stand. Then we're gonna repeat this process 3 more times for the other feet at all 4 corners of the spool stand. This partial assembly makes up the base of the universal spool stand, and now we can move on to the next part. In this next section, we'll be attaching one of the vertical upright tubes to the base assembly. There are 2 tubes included in the kit, and you'll notice that only one of them has a logo. Otherwise, they are both dimensionally identical. Therefore, they are interchangeable. However, I personally like having the tube with the logo on the bottom. One end of the tube has a single hole, and we'll be placing it into the base in this orientation here, and then using the M4x30 socket head cap screw with an M4 washer and inserting it into this hole in the front of the base. You can use a hex key wrench to push the M4x30 socket head cap screw all the way through the base and through the tube, and you'll start to see it poke out the other side. On the other side, there is a square receptacle, and we'll be putting in our M4 square nut. Now we can simply use our hex key to tighten down the M4 socket head cap screw, and again, do not over torque those screws. In the kit, you'll also find this standard length splice joint. Now there is an extended version of this, which can be found on my website. I'll put a link in the video description down below, and that'll be for taller machines, but the standard length is included in the kit, and it will slip on top of the tube that we just fastened to the base, and you'll want to place it in this orientation here, and you'll notice that it has 4 holes total, 2 of them for each of the tubes. The holes receive more of the M4x30 socket head cap screws and M4 washers, and on the back side there are more of the square receptacles for the M4 square nuts. Do not over torque these screws here either, and when you're finished, it should look something like this. Then we can grab our other tube, and just another friendly reminder that the 2 tubes are interchangeable, so you can place the logo on the top tube if you wish. Either way, we're going to take this second tube and we're going to insert it into the top of the splice joint and repeat the same process with 2 more M4x30 socket head cap screws and the respective washers and square nuts. At this stage, it's a good time to just double check that all of your parts are installed in the right orientation. Now we can move on to the top of the spool stand. The top of the spool stand holds the spool holder and spindle itself. We'll put those printed parts aside for just a second and grab our top mounting piece. You'll notice that one side is completely flat and it has a receptacle for a hex nut. The other side has a round counterbore hole, and we'll be grabbing our 125mm long bolt and slipping it through. The hex head of that bolt can be tightened with either a 1/2 inch or 13mm socket, so depending on where you live in the world, if you're using metric or imperial, it's compatible with both. You'll also notice that the kit comes with 2 of these hex nuts. One of them is a regular hex nut, the other one has a nylon locking insert. And for this part of the assembly, we'll be using the regular hex nut and threading it all of the way down that bolt. It should seat into the hexagonal receptacle and it will stick out a little bit. This is completely normal. And on the counterboard side, we can tighten down the head of the bolt. I would recommend using a wrench on the hex nut while you're tightening the bolt down so that the plastic doesn't get stripped. It's a fairly large bolt, and so again, this is another one you do not want to over tighten, otherwise you could collapse the plastic. Then we can slip our spindle over top of the bolt and then grab our nylon locking hex nut and thread that onto the end of the bolt to retain the spindle in place. The nylon insert on this nut provides a lot more resistance to turning, and so I would recommend holding the head of the bolt on the other side. Otherwise, the other hex nut that we've previously installed might actually come loose. Now this nylon hex nut serves 2 purposes. One of them, it keeps the spool spindle in place, and additionally, you can carefully adjust how tight it is in order to change the amount of friction on the spool. I like to add just a little bit of friction so that the spool can never freewheel and unravel. And then finally, we can thread in the end cap into the spool holder spindle bolt. This entire assembly will slip onto the top of the vertical tube. Ensure that it is facing the correct direction. The weight of the spool should be supported by the slotted feet at the bottom so that the spool stand is stable and it does not tip over. Place the spool stand face down on your table, and you'll notice there's a small rectangular slot in the back of the top mount where we'll insert an M4 square nut, and then we can use our final M4x30 socket head cap screw and washer, insert it through the side of the top mount, and tighten it up into that square nut. This completes the assembly of the spool stand itself, and it should look like this when it's done. Up at the top, there is the spool holder spindle, and we'll be able to unthread the red conical nut. This universal spool stand is intended to support 1 kilogram spools only. Personally, I really like using the eSun refill spools, and I've got these really nice twist blade master spools available on my website that are intended for use with those refill spools. Now we're about to hop into tackling a few specific applications, and I anticipate one of the more popular ones will be the Ender 3 series printers, and for these I have this runout detection sensor relocation bracket that fits all of the Ender 3 models. These machine-specific parts are parts that you'll print yourself. I'll include the hardware for them inside of the spool stand kit, and this one is just a two-piece bracket that goes together with a single M3x10 thread forming screw. The first supported Ender 3 variant is the Core XZ Ender 3 V3, and I've covered this installation in a separate video. I'll put a link in the top right-hand corner of the screen right now. And the reason that I'm not covering the entire installation in this video here is that it's a little bit more involved because of the relocation of the filament runout detection sensor. But as you can see in these clips here, the Ender 3 filament runout detection sensor relocation bracket that I just showed you guys how to assemble fits the Ender 3 V3, and I've included this accessory hardware in the universal spool stand kit, as well as the wire extension harness that you'll need for the Ender 3 V3 Core XZ. And so if it's still not clear, all you need to do is print the brackets specific to your application, and in the universal spool stand kit, I've included all of the hardware and hard to find parts to make those printed accessories work with the various official supported applications. And keep in mind that there are a lot of Ender 3 style clones out there, so a lot of these accessories and brackets will be compatible with those. For example, the same filament runout detection sensor bracket that we just used on the V3 was designed to also be compatible with the Ender 3 S1, and at the top of that frame it uses the generic 2020 extrusion, and so in the accessory hardware kit you'll find some M3 T-nuts, as well as M3x10 socket head cap screws and M3x25 thread forming screws. We'll need these parts for the Ender 3 S1, and the first thing we'll do is detach the original filament runout detection sensor at the top of the machine by removing the M3 screws, and then we can pop off the original spool holder. We can drop in the M3 T-nuts into the top extrusion, and these are going to line up with these holes in the top of this bracket. Then we'll use the M3x10 socket head cap screws and tighten those into the T-nuts, but back them off about 3/4 of a turn so that the whole thing can still be slid back and forth across the V-slot channel. Then we can get our second M3x10 screw in place, and now we can attach the filament runout detection sensor to the ball joint mount using the M3x25 thread forming screws. Then we can take a look at this assembly from the back of the machine, and there's this wire management insert into the back of the V-slot extrusion, and we're going to push that towards the left side of the machine to free up some slack in the wire harness. We want the ball joint on this mount to be able to move freely, and if you want even more slack in that wire, you can take out that insert and just cut it a little bit shorter. The Ender 3 S1 is going to need a little bit of extra height for the spool stand feet to slip underneath of it, and so I've got these spacers that you can also download, a link in the video description down below. I've printed them in TPU, but they're fine to print in PLA as well, and then we can take the spool stand and place it beside the Ender 3 S1, making sure that the vertical bar does not come in contact with or interfere with the movement of the gantry. I'll install a spool on top, and you can see that there's plenty of clearance to the rest of the machine, and we'll feed the filament in through the runout detection sensor down into the print head. On this machine here, you might notice that I've got a really nice LED bar upgrade that moves with the gantry. It's adjustable, so that LED bar can be rotated for your viewing preference, and I'll be making this upgrade kit available on my website shortly. I'll also have variants of this LED bar upgrade available for the Ender 3 SE, KE, and V3 Core XZ in due time, so be sure to check back on my website embracemaking.com for these upgrades. And while I've got a job running on this machine, you can see the ball joint runout detection sensor bracket working, and so it will be rotating back and forth to keep the filament in alignment with the print head. And on the side of the spool stand, I've populated all of those holes with the very common Ender 3 tools and accessories. Now we can have a look at the Ender 3 V3 SE and KE. The installation on these two machines is completely identical. We'll be using the same runout detection sensor relocation bracket, and on the SE and KE we'll remove the two screws holding the original runout detection sensor, and then we can remove the two M5 button head cap screws that are holding the original spool mount to the top of the printer frame. We're going to be reusing these two M5 button head cap screws for our own ball joint sensor mount, so be sure not to discard them. From the accessory hardware bag, we're just going to need two of the M3x25 thread forming screws. Now we can take our runout detection sensor relocation bracket and we can place it on top of the SEKE frame, and you'll see the two original holes will line up with the holes in the bracket, and again we'll be reusing those M5 button head cap screws and tightening the bracket down. Then we'll mount our runout detection sensor to that bracket using the M3x25 thread forming screws. This application is extremely easy as the runout detection sensor is already at the top of the machine, and this is also another application where you're going to need the spacer feet, link in the video description down below. And with those spacer feet, the spool stand will slide comfortably underneath the printer frame, and then we can insert our filament through the runout detection sensor and into the print head. This is probably one of the easiest applications to do the install, and it's been working great for me on both of my KE printers. Now we can move on to the K1, K1C, and K1 Max applications. For the K1 and K1C, there are a few printed parts as seen here, and the hardware is included in the hardware accessory bag. The smaller of the two printed parts is this PTFE tube clip. One of the holes has a large chamfer on it, and this is the side in which we'll insert the PTFE tube collet. If your printer tolerances are pretty good, the collet should comfortably slip into place, and then we can temporarily install the clip so we don't lose it. On the side of this part there is a counterboard hole which is intended for the M3x10 socket head cap screw that is included in your accessory hardware bag. At the back of the K1 and K1C, you'll have a PTFE tube guide clip, and we'll be removing the original tube, and we'll also be removing this tube guide. You'll want to save this guide and the two screws because we're going to be reusing them. Then we can remove the two screws holding the filament runout detection sensor in place, and you will not need to remove the harness, so don't bother unplugging it. We're just temporarily moving this sensor aside because the other larger printed bracket for this application is an alignment bracket. You'll see that the two holes in the runout detection sensor line up with two holes on this bracket, and then from our hardware kit, we'll be using our M3x25 thread forming screws and threading them into the original hole locations on the back of the K1. This will securely hold the whole assembly in place, and then we can bring back our original tube guide with the original hardware and thread it into the two holes in this alignment bracket. The purpose of this alignment bracket is to line up the PTFE tubes from top to bottom so that when you push the filament through, it should pass through the tubes and the sensor without getting stuck. Now we'll install the PTFE tube clip that we had just previously assembled, and at the top of the K1 there is a single M3 screw that we'll remove, and we'll be replacing that with our tube clip and our M3x10 socket head cap screw. You'll want the tube collet facing downwards, and then we can remove our retainer clip, and then we can push our piece of included PTFE tube through the tube retainer so some of it sticks out of the top, and the other end will get inserted into the runout detection sensor, and we can replace our retainer clips. On the K1 printers, we'll be installing the spool stand on the right hand side of the machine, and the slotted spool stand feet will straddle the right rear corner foot of the K1 series printers. Up at the top of the machine, you can see the little piece of PTFE tube peeking out, and this is where we're going to be inserting our filament. And with the alignment bracket in place at the back of the machine, we should be able to just feed the filament through at the top of the machine, and the filament will appear at the free end of the tube at the print head without having to intervene or wiggle that filament around. The height of the spool stand provides enough clearance for the original lid to fit. Now we have a very convenient location to access our spool, and the entire filament change process can be done from the top of the machine without any trouble trying to get the filament to go through the runout detection sensor. On the K1 Max, it's slightly different, so at the top middle of the machine, we're still using the PTFE tube clip, but because the runout detection sensor is located inside of the K1 Max, there is no alignment guide. Our PTFE tube loop will go from our PTFE tube clip through the opening at the back of the machine where the original entrance point was for the PTFE tube, and then directly into the runout detection sensor. The only other unique thing about the K1 Max application is that it is a taller machine, and so the original tube splice joint is too short. On the accessory download page, there's a link to a splice extension. This increases the height of the spool stand by about 25 millimeters, allowing for a little bit of extra clearance on taller machines like the K1 Max. So be sure to check the accessories and adapters page on my website. I'll put a link to that in the video description down below because these applications are constantly being updated. So that covers some of the more popular applications that are currently supported right now. And just don't forget that because a lot of the Ender 3 applications are supported, that would likely include a lot of the Ender 3 clones that are out there. Be sure to check the video description down below because that is where you will find all of the relevant links to the parts and things that we've discussed in this video. And finally, if you guys enjoy these videos and these upgrades, be sure to hit the subscribe button so you do not miss the next one. That's it for now. Keep an eye on that supported applications page on my website, embracemaking.com. Thanks for watching.